Welcome back live at Drew's house. Another edition, August flying by on us, but what a week we have in the world today. The world has changed in a lot of ways. And with that, I'm going to bring in a return guest. He's already ready to go. We bring in former Army Major, combat veteran Mike Lyons joins us again. How are you, sir?
Hey, Drew, very good. Thanks for having me back.
Very good. Coming to us from, where are you tonight? In Virginia, you said?
Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia.
Very good. I don't even know where to start. There's so much in the news here in regard to Afghanistan. It has been a crazy week. Why don't I just start with a very blanket? What's your take on it all here as you settle down here in the middle of the week?
So watched it start to unfold on Friday and didn't realize by Sunday it would be fundamentally over. Endgame for Afghanistan, endgame for the Afghan government. Something that this government, our government, predicted was not going to happen. We were reassured by the president before. And now that we're 4 days in, frankly, there are things happening that we could decide to do to stop, and we're not stopping them. And I've got real concerns about that. We've got Americans that are trapped really behind enemy lines right now. You know, this is the analogies of Dunkirk are similar, but now we could have a situation where the Taliban decides that says enough's enough and no one's coming out. We've got to get a lot more creative with some of our solutions. I just haven't seen that. And frankly, every time a government official gets out there, they start talking about things that just don't have anything to do with reality. So as a vet, someone that's watched the foreign policy really my whole life, this is the greatest debacle, the greatest mistake, the greatest miscalculation in really my lifetime.
There is as far as people getting out, I'm just watching the news just before you came on, and there does seem to be a real two different kind of sets of things we're hearing. We're hearing the government that the Taliban's allowing people to come through, but it seems like on the streets that is just not true. I mean, we have people with actual green cards that are being said they're not being allowed to the airport, and it's just chaos on the streets of Kabul and other places too as they try to get to the airport. Are you surprised by that chaos or no?
No, not surprised, as we don't have a secure route to get from the embassy, which I guess we have some troops there, but there's a cordon around the entire airport from the Taliban that's preventing people from getting in if they get close. So the first thing that we have to do is expand that perimeter, and the only way we do that is to bring in more troops. Now, and the second thing is the math's not working for me. If we're taking 1,000 people out a day max, if that's what they're saying they're doing right now? We're going to run out of time here pretty soon based on August 31st. And I guess the president said that it's going to be expanded, but you're talking 3-4 months to get everybody out. And I don't know where the extra lift capability is coming from. And again, how much more the Taliban is going to put up with this. So the situation remains tenuous. Literally, we go to bed, wake up and see what's happened on the ground. And every day so far, it continues to deteriorate.
You mentioned the Taliban's not going to be happy with this. They definitely, they know they don't like the looks of everybody trying to flee the country, right? I mean, that's not a great look for an incoming government. They want this thing to get over with quickly. That goes to your point, right?
Yeah, and that's right, because as that happens, it's a talent drain. People running the country, engineers that are running the power plants and the like. Kabul's a city with about 4.5 million people in it. There's so many things going on there. But when our government says, the Secretary of Defense says that, we can't ensure safe passage for some Americans, you've got to get to the airport. I'm just dumbfounded by that. That's something that we might have heard in the 70s when we didn't have a lot of capability. We just have a lot more of this capability, and it's like we choose not to use it. Now, I do know this, and we talked about this earlier in the week, was that I didn't think a lot of troops were there. And now we come to find out that was the case. They just kind of got there in the last 24 hours. Early on, we gave this impression that we had troops there, and they just weren't. They were sitting on the tarmac at Fort Bragg. But again, we've got to get creative. 20,000, 30,000. You've got to send a small division in there at this point right now if you want to assure every American and Afghans coming out or not. And if we choose the or not, then that sends signals onto itself.
Call me crazy, but I was surprised to hear President Biden say today that there might be 10,000, 15,000 Americans in Afghanistan. It seems like that might be a number that maybe I thought we would have had pinned down a little bit more. I know it's a big country and everything, but are you surprised that we don't know exactly how many people we're trying to get out?
Well, that's not necessarily government workers. So people go there, live there, they met Afghan people, they marry there. Once the United States plants roots in a place like this, were there 20 years now. There's a lot of people that kind of went there, worked as a contractor, stayed there on the economy for whatever reason. And so that's really what that's happened. So this is, we would have seen this in Germany, saw this in Japan, or let's say South Korea. This is this non-combatant evacuation. It's called NEO, and that's when you heard him say it's just the second largest NEO plan we've ever executed. So that doesn't surprise me. What does surprise me is they don't know where they are. They're all not in Kabul either. They could be in the outskirts. So if you're an American in Afghanistan right now, you might have to escape north to the stands. You might have to escape east to Pakistan. God forbid, you got to go west to Iran. If you want to get out of that country, if you're going to get hunted down, you're going to have to, again, be as creative, not necessarily try to get back to the airport. You might be just too far. You might just not be able to get there.
I was very struck, speaking of getting outside of Kabul a little bit, by Jalalabad today, where you had actual Afghan civilians ripping down the Taliban flag and then taking the Afghan flag and parading it around the streets, not armed. It didn't seem like these people, and there were Taliban there firing not necessarily at people, but certainly trying to break up the crowd. That is a scene that seems very dicey to me. I do believe we heard at least a couple deaths. Whether that was from, I'm not sure if it was gunshots or chaos after the fact, whatever, but that does not seem like a great situation on the streets of Jalalabad in the east.
Well, so it's fighting season from the Taliban's perspective. They've been rearmed. They've got money from Pakistan. They've recruited individuals, and there's still multiple pockets of resistance. They don't necessarily control every province. There's certain valleys, for example, in the north, that they know they can't get in and out of because of the townspeople there are going to defend their land. And so there are still places that the Taliban's not going to control. And for them, that's fine. They want to control most of the ungoverned spaces. But I do think that the civil war is going to rage on. We're going back to the future. We're back to the mid 90s where there's potential to have a Northern Alliance. The question is, what other countries are going to do? Pakistan's going to come in. Are they going to support the Taliban? What's the Chinese going to do? Are they going to come in? The more that other nations end up supporting the Taliban, and then also if they continue with these human rights abuses, then how does anybody pass the red face test? How does anybody say that this is a legitimate country that should be in the country of nations when they continue to have these human rights abuses? So we just don't know what's going to happen, at least for another couple of weeks.
For what you know about the Taliban, and I know you know a lot more than I do, we've heard a lot about this. I think it's being billed. Could it be a Taliban 2.0, where they have gone into the hospitals and told the nurses, you can keep doing your job, told the female teachers, you can keep teaching? Is this just a grace period trying to show yourself to the world for the first month? Is that your fear? Or could there be a Taliban 2.0 that's a little bit more progressive? What's your take on that?
Yeah, not a chance. They want to implement Sharia law. They want to immediately bring Afghanistan back to the 9th century. What's a little bit hypocritical, though, is their use of social media. They want to do all that, but they want their Wi-Fi and they want their social media and they want their Twitter and they want all these things. So there's a conflict, and so they've got to be measured out as to see what actions and deeds and versus words. I think that this is what they're doing now to project this, social media. They've had 20 years out of power to see, how the world goes. And I think they recognize that social media is an accelerant. And if they can put things out there like that, like they're doing good things, well, then Twitter and YouTube are going to let them, continue on their platform. It's completely hypocritical that we have a PR group within the Taliban on Twitter, but Donald Trump can't be on Twitter. So perhaps they'll change that by Friday. But again, the 2.0 is smarter, but it's not necessarily going to be better.
Again, former Army Major Mike Lyons joining us now. When you look back at this 20 years, playing a little Monday morning quarterback, for lack of a better term, is this how it always ends? I mean, we've heard that argument from the White House, that getting out of a place like this is never easy. Maybe it could have been done better, but was this always an inevitable bad ending? What's your take on that?
No, I don't think it never had to be that way. And a lot of it had to do with how this whole was communicated from the start. For example, at the end of the Korean War, we left troops inside of South Korea. We still have up to 50,000 active duty troops there. We have troops inside of Japan. We have troops in Western Europe and Germany. And they're designed to work with our allies and keep the peace. For whatever reason, I thought once we went into Iraq that we would never leave Iraq. But Barack Obama proved us wrong on that. And that same mentality shifted over to Afghanistan. And what I found amazing, that only 2,500 soldiers was able to keep the peace inside Afghanistan for as long as it did. And the second we took them out, then the whole thing collapses. That in most cases, it usually takes tens or 20,000 soldiers to do something like that. So it just goes to show you that with a very small footprint. Now, I guess you could argue that maybe it is better to be out, let the Afghan government run itself. But from a realistic perspective, given what everybody knew about what was going on, it would have been okay to keep 2,500 troops there. The war's over for a long time. We haven't had a combat death in a long time. And given what's happened now, I think it's going to prove to be a foolhardy decision.
From what you know about the training that went into these Afghan soldiers, they got run over quickly. Let's face it. The Taliban moved in faster than I think, in a day almost. What would you say? Yeah, obviously they were getting trained well from the Americans, but I mean, is that just is it impossible to do it in that short of time? However, why could they not be trained up? Why did they not fight?
Well, okay, a couple things. First of all, they did fight. In fact, over the past 6 years, they've had casualties, combat deaths in excess of 60,000. That's more than we had in 14 years in Vietnam. It's a tremendous sacrifice, obviously, from what our soldiers did. But from their perspective, they'll tell you that that's not the case. They suffered lots of casualties. But the second thing was this exaggerated number of 300,000. Joe Biden gets up there and says, well, 300,000 troops, they're really doing good. The people I talked to, the folks that were responsible for training them, will tell you the number was never 300,000. The number was probably 60, 70,000. The number was just never that high, because of the illiteracy and because of all the other things that go into it. They just couldn't get the Afghan soldier to fight. They don't have a lot of people. It's a smaller country, all those kinds of things. I mean, our standing army is 500,000. For us to think that a country that's, not even 1/20th the size of ours is going to have for 300,000 is completely exaggerated. So I think that's part of the issue, is that at the end of the day, the smaller units then get overwhelmed as they were trying to fight out in the countryside, get overwhelmed. And we lost a numbers game. We just there wasn't really enough of them. There was never really 300,000. There's never really enough of them.
So this narrative, that would be disrespectful and offensive to the Afghan fighters over there, to say that they did not try to stand their ground here, because there's quite a sacrifice.
That's right. And I think that what the Taliban did was use classic military tactics of economy of force, and they masked in areas where they knew that there wasn't a lot of Afghan security forces. So if you go around and look at the past, like we've had our head in the sand. The past 4 months, they've been taking these provincial areas outside of the capital, kind of one at a time. We were never able to come back and kind of win any of those areas back, because as the units were being attrited down, our units were suffering casualties too. And then about 60 days ago, we pulled the plug on air support. We pulled the plug on ISR, which means they didn't have any intelligence. They were kind of flying blind. We just let them do the whole thing. And that's where we actually worked in concert together with them. But once we pulled out our forces, it all went south. One more thing, Drew. Here's the other issue. The way you're supposed to do this, we did it completely in reverse, right? In a normal neo-evacuation, the first people to go are the civilians. The civilians should have left months ago. Once we knew the military was going, once the military decided it was going, the civilians should have went. The second thing that goes then is the equipment, or the equipment is literally destroyed. Now, in this case of Afghanistan, landlocked country is likely going to be destroyed if it wasn't going to be used, because we didn't want it to fall to enemy hands. And then the last people to go are the soldiers. We did it in complete opposite. We actually convinced ourselves from an assumption that everything was going to be okay and the Afghan government was going to work. So we just pulled the soldiers out. We didn't offer you saw our administration basically tell a lie that said, well, we asked people to go months ago and they didn't want to go. That just wasn't the case. We didn't give any priority for them to go. No one expected to happen what had happened. But in a real world, you would have done this in the complete opposite manner. You would have had civilians go, then equipment, and then the soldiers.
You mentioned the relative peace that the American forces, a very small group of American forces, were able to keep over there in recent years. It makes me think, how good of a fighting force actually is the Taliban? I mean, they know the terrain, they know the geography, but just from a, you're a professional, you get it, you get to see the tactics. How strong of an army is the Taliban?
They have strength in numbers, and we, use our technology and we use our equipment in order to work as combat multipliers, especially with our air and our drones. So we don't normally, if you're fighting in these ratios, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, Afghans, the Taliban comes at us probably in a ratio of about 6-to-1, 5 or 6-to-1. They have that many more fighters that are just kind of massing against the Afghan security forces as well as us. But because of our technology advantage, because of what we could see over the horizon, and then because of the lethality of our weapon systems, we're able to kind of bring that back to maybe a 3 or 2-to-1 kind of match, which is in the defense is what you're supposed to do. So they're good fighters, and they've lost a lot of people as well. But that's their jihad, that's their ideology, and that's what they're there to do.
When President George W. Bush takes us in 20 years ago to Afghanistan after September 11th, what is your first reaction? Is it, here we go, let's go get these guys that did September 11th to us? Or is it, oh boy, we have a lot of fighting ahead of us for many years to come? What is your reaction? Put us back in 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, this was no match from the very beginning, and we quickly ejected the Taliban government. We just basically blew the whole thing up. They did what the current Afghan government did now, and then a lot of their leaders left. Muhammad Omar, the original founder, they just left, and so we had victory very quickly. But we had the pottery barn problem, as Colin Powell says: you break it, you buy it. And short of colonizing it, which is again makes no sense here in 2020 years ago, we're not going to create the 51st state in Afghanistan, but we needed to pour a lot more resources into it. And at some point, Barack Obama, we had 100,000 troops in there, but then we had this great distraction in Iraq, and I think it just goes to show you that we just really weren't capable of doing both of those kinds of things in the same kind of mission. Then we see that mission that takes place with inside of Iraq once Saddam Hussein falls. We saw the insurgency that took place in Iraq, and then Obama gets elected president. Iraq, bad war. Afghanistan, good war. He takes us out of Iraq. We have ISIS now in Iraq. Now we're trying to fight ISIS in Iraq. We send more soldiers back to Iraq. We took our eye off the ball of Afghanistan. This could have been solved 10, 20 years ago. It could have been solved in all likelihood 15 years ago by either pulling out at that point in time and just kind of letting it go. But you look back and say, we just didn't because we got distracted in Iraq.
Final two here with Mike Lyons, former Army Major, combat veteran. It seems like there are veterans who are a lot of them are obviously very unhappy. They're disappointed in their country right now because of this. There are those who said, I've always said we need to get out. You're hearing some of that as well. But there seems to be one thing that everybody who served does not like about this, and that is leaving people behind on the ground. It seems like almost across the board, people that have served are very upset about this and very upset about how that makes this country look. What is it right now that is really getting under the skin of those who have served?
Yeah, I think that we're redefining what that means now. Leaving people behind. Well, they really didn't want to come out in the first place. We look at what we're doing with our allies. This not affected just Americans, the Germans, the Dutch, the British. Our allies are there. The French, they've got the same evacuation problems as we do. Now, the Taliban might not have them in the crosshairs as well, but this is the greatest failure of a NATO mission since the beginning of NATO. NATO usually hasn't seen this kind of thing. But I think most veterans look at this and say, I never in my lifetime, as I've studied the history of war really my whole life, I never in my lifetime thought we would see that, helicopters on buildings. It's literally Saigon, 1975. I never thought we would do that again. I thought we would learn from that, and we just didn't. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because it took two generations the same. But the bottom line is, what's got veterans concerned right now is we all know we could fix this. If we wanted to do this, we could fix it. We could send in more troops. We can. If we have the resources to go do this. I mean, for example, our military equipment's being taken to Iran. It's being taken to Pakistan. We're watching it go on convoys across the way. Why aren't we blowing it up? Why aren't we still attacking? I don't know. For whatever reason, we're deciding to just do nothing. And that, I think, has got most veterans concerned.
How does this play out in your mind?
I think it gets worse before it gets better. I think at some point it's going to turn into a hostage situation, and we could be negotiating a surrender. So they're going to continue to You know, the question is, we'll likely pay them millions of dollars reparations. There'll be something that'll happen, and in order for us, the bottom line is this: the embarrassment is going to continue. The humiliation is going to continue. And it's great to see impassioned people like, General Austin and General Milley and these people stand up, talk about this is personal. If it was personal, then go to Afghanistan and go help out, because we need more people there in order to fix that situation. I just think the humiliation is going to get a lot worse, and there's really a possibility of us having to do some kind of formal surrender.
Former Army Major Mike Lyons, thank you so much for your time. Nobody gives you a better layout on that than you do. We appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for having me.